Hello, everybody. So, back for part 5 of this video series where I'm getting ready for a summer camp week-long game dev for high school students at the college I work at, and just wanted to run through my plan beforehand. And I thought I'd go ahead and make videos and throw those on YouTube because other people are interested in that, not just the kids that are going to be in the classroom with me for a week later this summer. And in previous videos, we set up our project using the Godot engine, though the tutorial here is about game development in general, and that's just the one we're using for an example because it has an easier learning curve than Unreal. Uh, it's easy to get lost in Unreal, and Unity has more features than Godot. But Godot is still fully featured, so there's still plenty enough to get lost in there, but not as lost as we would in, like, say, the Unreal Engine. So that's just our example, but I'm still trying to generalize it to game dev. And part of that is making models. Um, Make sure to state this explicitly somewhere that some people think they'll get into game dev and just sit and write code. And if you think about it, the artist can do it without the programmer, but the programmer cannot do it without the artist. So that kind of tells you which field it actually falls in, even though we are doing some code. So modeling and being able to do the graphics is a big part of it. Even if you're planning on doing the role where you're just going to be typing code most of the time, you still need to be aware of the graphics and modeling and how it works and how the pieces go together, even if you're going to use models that somebody else made for you. So we still need to make some and get a little bit of practice with it, know how to do it, and do little edits. So I'm just going to start a new general project in Blender. And first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this stuff. A is select all as opposed to the normal control A. So just A to select all and get rid of that generic stuff. Or what I like to do is hit W, because what that does is it scrolls through our selection tool. So by default, it's a big box, which is pretty useful on 2D planes, but not so useful in 3D environment. Then a circle, and the third one is this freeform selection. So we just choose a shape, and that's a little bit easier to select things in a 3D environment. So I'm going to get rid of that default stuff. So we have our 3D viewing area here. We use mostly our mouse wheel to navigate around it. So if you click the middle wheel on a mouse, you'll need a 3-button mouse. You can see down here, the middle button is pan view, and the other one is dope sheet that has to do with animations. And the left click has to do with animations. We can see it down there in status bar. So we need the middle mouse wheel to rotate. And if we hold shift, notice that that middle button now says pan. So shift and middle click is pan. And then scrolling the mouse wheel is going to be zooming in and out. So the idea in 3D modeling is we start with, well, I'll put it in a cube here. So right now we have this cube, and by default, I want to make a quick change to the cube. You'll notice over here on the right on these tools, the orange thing, that has to do with our transform. There's going to be a lot of time spent with talking about transform in this video series. That's one of our most important aspects in game development. We'll be talking about vectors soon, but it's a vector composed of three-dimensional vectors, and each one of those has our location, the rotation, and scale. So where is it located at? How is it rotated? And how is it scaled? So that's transform data. That's going to be a big one for us. And you'll notice by default it says it has a scale of 1, but if we grab a little measuring tool and measure that, I'm at kind of a strange angle, but you can see that it's more like a 2-meter sphere. So it goes 1 meter each direction from the origin. And that's going to throw off all our scales, because in the early versions, we don't necessarily need a lot of details in our image, but what I found to be most useful is to have the correct proportions. So we need something about the size that our character would be. I like to go with regular dimensions, and if we start off by 2 by 2 by 2 square, then all those scale factors will be doubled. So first thing I like to do is always scale that down by 50%. So I'll just click here in the transform and scale that 50% each way. So now if we grab the measuring tool and take a measurement, um, I didn't get that very straight, but you can see it's a 1 meter square. So now if we want something, a 2 meter square, we would just make that twice as big. And if we push Control A, the normal selection thing, we can apply all those transforms. So now that 1 meter is 100%. I always like to do that step first on a cube. And now we have a 1 by 1 by 1 meter cube. So if we go to scale it, we have some good sizes here to work with. And now we can start modifying this and kind of know what's going on with it. So how does 3D modeling work? Well, if you've been watching these videos, might remember I talked about it in an earlier video, but repetition is important in learning. So we create a vertex, just a point floating in space, has some X, Y, Z coordinates for this point. And we make a bunch of them, a whole bunch of vertices. And then we connect those vertices with edges. I'm going to push W and get back to that freeform selection tool. And when we connect those vertices with edges, and whenever we have enough vertices connected with edges to fill a shape in, we put a face in there. So it's kind of like three-dimensional connect the dots. And this basic cube doesn't really give us enough dots to work with. So I want to turn this into a character. So I'm going to go back to object mode and deal with the whole thing at once. The first thing I want to do is make it about the right width of a character. So if I think about a person, let's say right now it's 1 by 1 by 1 meter, and a person is probably 20 centimeters thick, maybe 30 centimeters thick. So I want to scale that down to the right depth. So this is going to become the torso. We're not to the final version. There'll be some more detailed stuff about nicer versions of models later. Right now, we just need a quick one in the correct proportions so that we can begin debugging our game logic, get it moving around, and then we can put really fancy artwork on it later. So in Blender, -y is forward. So this is our front side. So this would be looking at the side view of the character. So I've found over the years to have these little, like the move tool, that gives us little handles to grab and gives us some control. So if I push S, that'll scale it up and down. I'm gonna push escape to get out of that. But along with that, we can add restrictions. So if we push S and then Y, now it's restricted so that it only scales on the Y axis. Some scale that down to somewhere around 20 to 30. That's my estimates of how thick a human's going to be. And then how wide is our chest? Our arms are going to come off the side. So what is that? Maybe 50 centimeters wide. That sounds reasonable. So I'm going to kind of look straight on and hit S and X this time, so it only scales on the X direction. And watching the numbers over on the right, I was looking at the numbers right over here. Scale it down to about 60 centimeters. That sounds like a good width. Just getting the rough proportions of it now. Might not need to be that tall, so I'm going to hit S and Z to scale on the Z axis and make it a little shorter. So that's my estimates for how big the chest is going to be. So now if we add some arms coming off and some legs and a head, we can do some basic animations to look at it. This is not our final version. If we come up here to the top left corner and go into edit mode, this is where we would start moving our vertices around and connecting edges, making new edges and faces. But the cube by itself didn't quite give us enough vertices to form a character shape, so we need to add a couple to that. And this is a long way from the final version. That's going to be coming in a few nicer versions will be coming in a few videos from now. For now, we just need a rough idea. So to send out two legs from the bottom, it looks like we need a couple more vertices here to split up this face so we can bring those spots out as legs. Which if we just cut this whole thing in thirds, that would work nicely because then that would give us a spot in the middle here to bring up for the head. So to do that in Blender, if you push Control R, that cuts a ring. There should be a preview showing up somewhere there. Control R will cut a ring. There we go. Wasn't getting the preview. And if you scroll up and down, you can change the number of rings it cuts. So if we make two cuts, I think on the front side, let's choose the number of cuts, and then we can move. And if we left click, it'll put it in place. And if we right click, it puts it back at the evenly spaced. So now, like these faces down here can come out and become legs, and this one here can come out and become the head. And we do that with extrusion. So I'm going to select the face. So up here next to the edit mode, where we switch to edit mode, select by vertex, by edge, or by face. So if we go to face and select this one and this one, I'm rotating around so I'm looking roughly at the front, and push E for extrude, we can bring those faces out a little. I'm going to bring them out just a little bit and stop there, and then switch to the move tool to move them down, and then that'll kind of work like the upper part of the leg. Maybe a little bit further. I'm going to scroll out, hit E again, get the lower part of the leg, and I did that in two spots instead of one so that there's a seam right in the middle so that when we go to animate it, there's a nice bend spot here. Extrude it down, maybe the ankles, extrude it again to get the feet, and then switch to these two faces. Turn sideways and hit E and extrude that forward to get a couple feet there. And up here in the top, we can extrude once to kind of get the neck. I'll extrude again, come out a little, and the top of the neck needs to get bigger for the head. So now I'm going to push S and scale that outward, and I'll keep doing that until it looks about right. So extrude, come out a little bit, click to set that, and then S to scale it, and then kind of move. And notice that it's doing strange things here in the middle. That's why I like to have the move tool on. I like to move, think of that like a handle. I don't want to move it per se, but it gives me a reference for the mouse. So if I hit S and then scale that out a little, E, extrude that up, I'll hold shift and middle click to move the model down, E, extrude up another one, and then S and scale it down, E, oops, E, extrude up another one, and I hit S and scale that down so we have kind of a nice rounded head on our body. And now we can do the same thing for the arms. So I'm going to kind of look at the side and push Control R to cut a ring. And that looks like the right direction that I want it to cut. So I'm going to click and move it up here about where a face for an arm looks good, and click there. Now we have a couple faces we can bring out. So select by face. Let's see. Kind of look here, hit E, extrude that out for a shoulder and maybe move it down. And R to rotate a little. E, extrude that out, move it down quite a bit, maybe a little bit back in, and rotate it. Just scale it down. Maybe rotate a little more. So I'm just extruding and rotating and scaling until it looks about like an arm. maybe a little, I'll leave the elbow almost horizontal here. Then, whoops, uh, E, extrude that out. And Control Z is undo. So if it doesn't end up at where you want it, just hit Control Z, undo the last thing. Make an extrusion for the forearm, which your forearm's going to get smaller. So I'm going to hit S and scale that in down. Extrude a little bit out for a wrist. Extrude another one for the hand. S to scale that out. Extrude, and I'll just bring that out, and then that'll work for the hand. And now I need to do something on the other side, which is going to be exactly the same. So I'm going to pause the video while I do the other side. Okay, so I just went through and set that up kind of the same way. I just looked at it from the front and tried to get it roughly matching. Uh, Not looking for perfection here. There's going to be more videos in this set about modeling with a lot more detail. But that'll give us a nice little starting point for our character. One thing I do want to do that will help, I'm going to look at the bottom here and click this face between the legs. And I'm going to push S, X, and scale that down so there's not so much space between the legs. There we go. So that looks like a good start to the character. And now we can animate this, which we'll do in the next video. So that'll give us our first a character to test our logic with. And that's mostly what you'll do for 3D modeling. It takes some trial and error. I first saw 3D modeling in the early 1990s, and I had formal training in 3D modeling with one of my degrees, with an engineering tech degree uh, from years ago. So I have had lots and lots of experience, and it's also one of my favorite things to do is to make 3D models. So I have had lots of practice, and it takes practice, but those concepts. So take a face, extrude it out, scale it, rotate it, and keep doing that. Add more vertexes and edges so that you get more faces, and extrude and rotate and scale it until you get the shape you want. It takes a lot of practice, but hopefully this is enough that you can start getting practice. Give it a couple tries to get a rough character going. We will do some tips and tricks and things to get a better one going later, but get some practice with that until it roughly looks like a character. And in the next video, we will animate this character. So I will see you all in the next video.